Yes. So could you tell me about yourself?
So my name is Hummer. I'm from England. Um, I lived in England all my life until I moved to Latin America, and I've lived in Latin America for almost 8 years. I lived in Colombia for 2.5 years, Mexico for 6 months, Peru, Argentina, and Ecuador for about a couple of months each. I lived in South Korea for 6 months as well. I lived in Pakistan for 6 months, and now I've lived in Chile for 6 years in total. So I've lived
Hmm.
outside of my country for 10 years and Latin America for 8.5, 9 years. And I've taught in Ministry of Education settings, so in public schools. I've taught privately, one-to-one classes. I have my own small business. I managed an institute in Chile as well. I work for different companies, and I've worked on Cambly for I think 7 years, I think. So I have
It's
lots
long.
of different teaching experience remotely with organizations, with NGOs, with government organizations,
Right.
institutes, kind of
You
thing.
said like working at sort of like government organization in Chile, or where is it?
I worked in Chile and in Colombia with two different Ministry of Education programs.
Right. Okay. So right now, I mean, what do you do? Like just a Cambry or other things?
So right now, I am the manager of a institute in Santiago in Chile. I work on Cambly. I work on another platform called Voxy, which is based in Chile, and I have my own private students and my own private company. So I have four different ways I teach English every day.
Wow. Wow. So many. So, but base is in Chile.
Yep.
Right. So there should be many, many, many countries in the world, but eventually you chose, Latin America, and it seems that you are living in Chile so long.
Mm-hmm.
So w- I assume that at least one, reason. Okay, Chile might be a good place, to work at to live. So what's that?
Compared to other countries in Latin America, Chile is quite a lot more stable, and
Hmm.
um, the infrastructure, because my background is architecture, so I really
Okay.
like a good infrastructure, like the network of roads and buildings and access to like education and healthcare and that kind of stuff. I think it's really important. And Chile has like a slightly higher level than other countries, so it
Hmm.
feels a little bit more familiar for me.
Hmm.
I loved living in the other countries as well, like Colombia and Mexico. You learn a lot. I learned a
Hmm.
lot. However,
Hmm.
to like buy an apartment, I bought an apartment in Chile because it feels familiar but different.
Hmm. So, like that, your background architecture, it might be a little related to your decision making to live
Mhm,
in Chile, probably. Wow.
mhm.
Okay, that's great. Go back to the education, the topic we might, commonly focus on.
Yeah.
So, I am an English teacher living in Japan and with multiple overseas experiences, and I've led one research about a Chile basis study, and in that study, yeah, I've led like that Chile is the place. Many businessmen there, and then like also second language acquisition, and like learning English is a
Yep.
kind of hot education spot, so
Yep.
many people learn English, and
Mhm.
in school they are taught in English, or many businessmen try to acquire English as a second language to make
Yeah.
success, I would say.
Mhm.
And yeah, and one of the researchers conducted one research. I mean, one group of seeing one successful businessman for the meantime. But the other group is just taking a class. So the contents are both are same, but one group is just seeing the video, kind of like
Mhm.
watching the video of the success story.
Mhm.
And obviously, this is related to motivation. And then,
Mhm.
like eventually, the score or like English proficiency is a huge gap.
Mm,
So when you teach English, what kind of, okay, first question is like, what do you think about this research based
mm.
on Chile? And the second question is that, like, what is your motto, or what you believe when it comes to English education, and that kind of thing. If you have philosophy or something like that.
I think in Chile and in every country, you will always have students who have an extrinsic reason for learning English and an intrinsic reason for learning English. So the
Mm,
motivation is going to always be better if they have an intrinsic reason, a necessity,
mm,
a guideline, an understanding, a pathway they want to follow. So maybe
mm,
it's like that everywhere you go. I can say the same
mm,
thing for every country I've been to. The difference between Chile, I think, is that it's very isolated in terms of tourism and exposure to native English speakers. It's very far
mm,
away. The almost it's touching Antarctica in the southern area, Chile, and it's
mm.
isolated from the rest of Latin America because you have the Andean mountain range, which people don't,
Right.
you couldn't pass very easily, and in the north,
Geologically.
Atacama Desert, and it's a very skinny country that's like not really part of Latin America in a way, in some ways, like historically because of Pinochet and the regime, and it was very divided. So I think in general, Chilean people tend to be a little bit more nervous about speaking English, and maybe they
Oh,
don't,
really?
yeah,
That's surprise.
they don't always have as much intrinsic reasoning behind learning English. A lot of the time, it's a requirement because they want to go further in their studies or they want to go further in their
By the way, the first language is what is the first language
Spanish.
in Chile?
Spanish.
Spanish. Okay. Right.
But the neighbor is Brazil. So a lot of people learn Portuguese. And there's like a
Oh,
intermediary language. It's not really a language, but it's called Portuñol, which is like Portuguese Spanish. So
I see.
most people who speak Spanish can understand a bit of Portuguese. And if you speak Portuguese, you can understand a bit of Spanish. So I
Okay.
think, generally speaking, um, so philosophy on teaching. I think my philosophy on teaching is always to try to make it as accessible as possible. So,
Accessible.
yeah, I think accessible learning makes more sense because you have to adapt to the learning style of the student. You cannot make a student adapt to your teaching style. I don't think that's
Apply.
yeah, I don't think it makes sense for me. Because you can't have a one size fits all. Like everyone cannot wear the same jumper. You have to have
Mm,
different sizes for different people, different materials. So being
right.
very flexible and moving your idea of how language should be learned based on how the
Mm,
student can take the language is my philosophy in teaching.
right. That's very interesting, and I'm always have that kind of similar thought in my mind. Okay, so your philosophy is like kind of adjusting apply to your teaching method from
Yep.
based on the teacher's background or experiences, what the students are, or like
Yep.
what do they want, right?
Yep.
So in Japan, it's obviously that country is like an exam-oriented country, and
Yep.
many people have an exam. Like a teenager have to take the
Hmm.
exam, and then like
Yep.
sometimes like the teacher who reputed as good, they tend to focus on just like, efficiently teaching exam style,
Hmm.
exam book, and then the students also obey and that kind of a thing. But of course, I do some sort of agree with that, but some sort of I don't agree. Because like
Hmm.
adaptability, cultural adaptability or acceptability is also are also very good and wonderful thing if they want to communicate with many nationalities. But it's
Hmm.
obviously like in Japan, it's a kind of a monolingual country. If
Yep.
you are me, if you are me
Mm.
teaching English in Japan in that kind of environment, what would you do?
I would test the boundaries.
Ah,
Keep
boundary.
pushing the boundaries a little bit. You can't
Mm,
change things immediately, and you cannot. People won't accept such a strong change, and it will
mm,
be very difficult for them because if someone has been learning in a certain way all their life, and suddenly you come out of nowhere and you change everything immediately, they're probably
right,
not going to be able to adjust very quickly. So maybe
right.
making little changes. So introducing a different style in one I don't know, one part of your class, 5 minutes of like open conversation, 5 minutes of um, putting some pre-teaching some vocabulary and saying, go and make a story, use your
Okay,
imagination,
right,
something that is a little bit out of the ordinary for just a
right,
very small amount of time would
right.
maybe help to loosen the
Mm.
atmosphere that's quite rigid, I think.
So that they could be open-minded more to
Yeah.
the many different kinds of perspectives or values,
Yeah. Yeah, if you
which
did a
you,
little bit every class, that's good enough, maybe, to
yeah.
begin with.
I like that. I love it. I love it. I don't want to be a teacher who just, just adjusted to the, the students' demand. But of
Mhm,
course, as a teacher, I just want to, convey some thoughts which are very
mhm.
interesting, even
Yep.
though which is not completely related to the exam, so
Mhm,
that like,
mhm,
society is different, just different from Japan society, and many societies in the world exist,
mhm,
of course. So as a teacher, yeah, really like that, your thought. Thank you very much
mhm,
tonight.
mhm.
Thank you.
It was so nice to speak to you. Very
Yeah,
interesting
definitely.
conversation.
Very definitely.